Okay. Fast penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to take the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everybody. Hi, Margaret. Welcome. Good to see you. And I think somebody else new to me. I'm Noman. Lila. Welcome. We have some slightly different translations, so if I sort of stomp on you by accident sometimes when you're chanting, just ignore me. I try to remember to listen, but you go into autopilot. So, one Sesshin logistical note, that one of the upsides of being a little bit smaller group is there's more opportunity to meet together, more opportunity for Doksan. And so Michelle and I were talking, and I think I'll just offer Dokusan every afternoon, and we'll start with people that haven't come yet, but then we'll just go around the room, So you might come twice, 3 times. And what this kind of suggests too, which I think is healthy and good, is Dokusan as a more just an ordinary practice, just showing up in the room, seeing what comes up. We'll talk a little bit. Thank you so much. In other words, that we don't have to freight it with, I need to have a brilliant question and the teacher will give me something to chew on for the next year, I don't need that pressure. And actually, sometimes those conversations are even much richer, actually, ironically. You would think, because we tend to think in the conventional world that the more we rehearse, the better it'll be. We know better, but we still think that way. So it's kind of good sometimes to be unrehearsed, Luckily, the recording machine isn't rolling. There's not going to be like a, live uncut album or anything. It's just you. And I think the real value of Dokusan is not so much the information that's exchanged, but kind of just the feeling of emerging from meditation into reflecting together, on Dharma, on practice, on this life, Whoa. And also what's happening right now, like the immediacy of now, right, is always our central point. So yeah, you might just come and say, oh my gosh, here's what was just happening in Zazen, How proud you are, or how embarrassed you are, or both and neither, of how it's going, So anyway, yeah. So you can pass if you're like, no, I just need to sit. But I recommend coming. It's not totally natural, I sure felt this way, and sometimes do still, to be a little nervous about that meeting, like it's pretty vulnerable, right? And you're going to get judged and evaluated, right? That's how we think, So it's a good practice to kind of enter that and have that not happen again and again and again. And little by little, it's just part of this process, of relaxing into ourselves, right? So it's not actually, the purpose of Dokusan is not to get your questions answered, actually. It's to relax into yourself, Yeah. So just to catch up, Lila and Margaret, we're doing a little bit on Dogen. Just a little bit each day, a little bit from 3 different pieces. Oh, and Wendy's sitting right there, right in front of my nose. Hi, Wendy. It's the readers. You're blurry. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Your poor knee up in rest position. Yeah. So anyway, to catch Wendy and Margaret and Lila up, a little bit on Dogen. And I have a present for you. I don't know why I managed to think of this, but I did. We have the piece we talked about last week and the piece, yesterday, and the piece I want to talk about now in our chant books, Fret Red Cedar. And what happens when you make a chant book is you always make a mistake. And sometimes you live with it, and sometimes like, darn it, we're doing a new edition. So these have like some mistake in it. I can't even remember what the mistake is. They look fine to me. So anyway, it has a bunch of stuff in it. So I'm actually going to pass that out. Maybe Travis can help. The danger here, of course, is not to immediately start reading this, you know, and my voice goes into the background, but just set it aside. We'll open it up in a minute. We'll open it up in a minute. But yeah, yesterday's Fukan Zazengi, Instructions for Zazen, is in there. And today I want to talk a little bit about another piece by Dogen called Genjo Koan. Text is so compelling, right? It's almost impossible not to open that up. Yeah, I get it. Set it aside. We'll get in a minute. Anyway, I do find, like, one of the things that's challenging about Dharma talks is even if the teacher does their level best, those just for the song, stick them somewhere, to, you know, speak clearly when they're quoting and maybe they repeat it. The teachers actually knows this stuff and they're looking at it probably on their notes, like I am. And for you, it's just like these words that just flew by, right? And you're like playing catch up. So maybe that'll be nice to be able to look at the words. But the trick will be not to be distracted by all the other thousands of words, you know, just what we're looking at together. So we'll try that. Somewhere in between a Dharma talk and a Dharma seminar, maybe. So anyway, this piece, Genjo Koan, is a really important piece by Dogen. It was also written when he was fairly young. It's a couple of years after yesterday's one. He noted that he wrote it in 2033, when he was 33. Handy, he was born in 1200, we can do the math. It'd be 34 in Asian reckoning, though. And pretty soon after he opened his first monastery, called Kosoji, just outside what's now called Kyoto. Then it was the imperial capital, called Heiankyo. And yeah, he had energy, this guy, you know. Opens a whole monastery and is writing like mad. And this piece appears to have started out as a letter to one of his supporters, a lay person in the imperial world somewhere, which probably he polished up a little bit later because he clearly wanted it to be part of this big collection he was intending to build. This was like his life work, this big collection of essays called Shobo Genzo, meaning the true treasury of the Dharma I. And we don't know exactly what his plans were. He didn't like leave notes, but somewhere he wanted to have somewhere between 75 and 100 essays in this big collection, and that would be his gift to the world. But it does look like he intended this one that we're going to look at today, Genjo Koan, to be the first one, so we can assume some importance from that without overthinking it. So let's open this up to page 24, and we'll just start at the beginning, and then we'll jump around a little bit for time. So page 24, first paragraph. And this is the kind of stuff where you could talk for hours about one paragraph, you know, or one sentence. So you can just read with your eyes while I read out loud, or however you want to do it. He starts off saying, as all things are Buddha Dharma, there is delusion, realization, practice, birth and death, Buddhas and sentient beings. As myriad things are without an abiding self, there is no delusion, no realization, no Buddha, no sentient beings, no birth and death. The Buddha way, in essence, is leaping clear of abundance and lack. Thus, there is birth and death, delusion and realization, sentient beings, and Buddhas. We'll stop there. The next one should be another paragraph, probably. So here we have some Zen stuff right out of the gate, you know, right? It is and it isn't, and because it is and isn't, it is and it isn't, and so on and so forth. And it actually is a little challenging, even for scholars, to kind of work out his exact logic here. But I think the point is pretty clear, and we talked about this yesterday too. That we kind of have our foot in these two worlds to some extent, more in one than the other usually. Right? The world of the relative, of the conditioned, of all our personalities and problems and ideas and language and concepts, and, you know, the blurry world of thinking and worrying and fretting, you know. But we also sometimes feel the peace of the world, right? The peace that's behind the words or in between the words and concepts. That sometimes it's called the absolute or awakening or something like that. And that within these two worlds, we have two kinds of beings, two big groups of beings. Broken, ordinary people like us, called here sentient beings, and Buddhas, right? And they seem like very different things. And so naturally, with our foot mostly in the relative world, buffeted by the winds of the world all the time, we believe more in being a broken person, even if sometimes we deny that really well for a long time, but it's in there. And a Buddha seems like this impossible aspiration, but maybe practice will help because nothing else did, right? So maybe that's how we start. But he's saying here, it's a mistake to have this division, and that there's a lot of ways you could look at it that would be much more helpful. And then the best way to look at it is to jump clear of all those ways of looking at it. So this line here is the key line is towards the end here, where he says, the Buddha way in essence is leaping clear of abundance and lack. So don't get caught, So Buddhism, he's saying, lays out this beautiful theory, and now please forget about it, right? So you could say, just be, just practice, We recognize in some deep way without thinking about it, because the minute we think about it, we know what happens, right? That we are Buddha, right? And we know, through plenty of experience that we are a sentient being, but we're not stuck in either position, right? So it's leaping clear of categories is what he's saying. So that's how he starts this whole essay, is like, this, not this, this, not this, this, not this. And sometimes I think about these teachings, they aren't, this whole piece isn't kind of like a normal essay from our point of view. With an introduction and supporting arguments and a conclusion. Or maybe each sentence is that whole thing really condensed. But it's more like a bunch of kind of mental and spiritual yoga working on our mind, putting us into positions that we thought we could never quite do, and stretching our minds. So maybe that's the way to think about it. And sometimes, often what's suggested is, think about this stuff, sure. And Dogen was very scornful of people who thought this doesn't make sense. He said that very explicitly in another piece. But don't think about it too much. Also let the feeling of it roll over you. Just kind of let the feeling of the words just kind of come into your heart and kind of stretch your mind. And if there's any little part in there that kind of pops out at you, like, oh, then just let that be a moment of appreciation and joy, and don't try too much to figure it out. But the conclusion being that thus there is birth and death, delusion and realization, sentient beings and Buddhas, is saying if you understand the previous part, then you can be in this relative world in a grounded, open way, right? Then you can practice, because you know that it's all actually leaping clear of all these categories, and these categories are just ideas and conventions that are designed to help us, skillful means. Don't get lost in them. Jump clear. So that's a kind of challenging bit, but I felt like he opened with it, so it didn't seem legit to skip it. So the next one I want to talk about actually is much more accessible and really cool. Actually, before that, just this last line of this paragraph is pretty great all by itself, very sensible. Yet, and it's not clear how the yet attaches it, but yet, in attachment blossoms fall, and in aversion weeds spread. So this is a serious everyday life practice suggestion, isn't it? To notice our attachment and our aversion. To notice what happens in the mind when we want something, or we want something never to stop or never to leave, in a relationship, a material thing, a great idea you just had, what you're worried you're going to forget, What happens? Blossoms fall, right? So this is about impermanence. And so we can study that in our mind. And what's nice about chanting this, and we chant it in our rituals at home, so you can chant this too, or read it many times, is it kind of plants the seed that may germinate into a teaching phrase the next time you are really annoyed by impermanence, and really upset by it, and justly so. And what's the thing that we're most attached to? Life itself, right? So it's really horrifying when people die, it is. And this is not to say that that's not the truth, but the quality of their dying also has this quality of naturalness, right? the blossoms fall, of course. How could there be life without death? So it helps us to see the beauty also, without denying the challenge. And same with aversion, right? When we're in aversion and we're digging in and we're, doing the mental loops about why this shouldn't have happened and why she shouldn't have said that to me and what I wish I had have said, you know what I mean? Well, what are we doing, right? We're fertilizing the weeds in our mind, right? You can probably guess what we're fertilizing them with, Right? And so they get stronger. And this matches cognitive psychology perfectly, right? The more you rehearse a thought, the stronger it gets, right? And the more you believe it, and the more bitter and angry you are, And, the way you use your mind, what you practice gets stronger is a great aphorism for all of us, right? What you practice gets stronger. So Dogen with this one line telling us, well, what do you want to practice, Do you want to practice attachment and be so upset about the falling blossoms? Do you want to practice aversion and fertilize the weeds? Or maybe there's another way you can be. And so the rest of this essay is about other ways that we can be. But isn't that nice? Next time you're upset, see if that'll pop up, and maybe it'll help, or maybe it'll just piss you off some more. Like, stupid Buddhist teachings is actually terrible. What do they know? Yeah. So at the bottom of this page is Dogen's probably most famous teaching ever. It's the beginning of the very last paragraph on page 24 here. So let's appreciate this teaching. To study the way of enlightenment is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drops away. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. So this is definitely another one we could bring up in daily life. And maybe this teaching actually is a pretty clear bridge between these two kind of worlds, Because it starts out sounding like it's in the world of the relative, right? Study the ways to study the self. Yeah, that's right? We agree with that. I want to know myself better. I want to understand my patterns, I want to be less this, that, or the other, unwind this stuff and heal, right? And so here we have the entire domain of psychology. No offense to any therapists in the room, but, that's where it is, right? Understanding and healing the self, studying the self. And then he leaps us clear, right, into this world of openness and wholeness by suggesting to study the self is to forget the self. And then you feel a little inner tension probably, right, which is the work of our practice, Forget the self. Well, I don't always like myself, but this is me, This is the most important thing in the universe right here. Can't forget about that, right, And what would happen if I forgot about that? It's kind of a threatening idea, actually. What would be left of us, right, if we forgot about ourselves? And I think it's a helpful little challenge for us. And like I say, kind of a bridge. Because maybe, as we feel resistance to forgetting ourselves in Zazen, for instance, that's like one of the clearest places to practice this, right? That's exactly the instruction, isn't it, of noticing your thoughts, which are what we identify with, right? We think that's me. And forgetting about them, right? Letting them go, right? Coming back to the breath. And maybe we kind of nuance it by saying, well, I'm the breath too. But, we're kind of forgetting about ourselves every time we do that. And you start to notice, I think, the parts of you that are really resistant to this. And maybe they manifest as the parts of you that are actually kind of attached to your craziness. Do you know what I mean? Like it's so familiar. You're kind of inner bratty child, And you may that part of you that in some cases would rather be right than happy. Do you know that part of you? Yeah. You idiots don't get it, or I'm the idiot, same thing, And so this is suggesting that actually the best thing is not to figure all this out. It's not to solve it, but to just forget it, let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go. Just let ourselves open into Buddhahood, basically, right? That's our nature. And so we can just hang out there probably for the rest of our lives, study the self, forget the self, study there. And both are valuable. I think that's one way we could misunderstand this. We should definitely treasure a good therapist and inner work and healing from trauma. These are good things, right? No question. Very needed in a suffering world. But there's also a way we can get stuck there, right? We know that also too well, right? There's always more, right? There's always more in there. It's endless. Therapists have good job security, no question. In my town, there's not enough of them. Is that true here too? They're all full. Yeah, they're all full because people need this help. And it's again, it's leaping clear, right? Can I take care of myself in this careful, conscientious, thoughtful way, and also include this ingredient of the softness and the fluidity and this, like, the spaciousness of, like, but yeah, that's not really me, actually, anyway, right? It's just kind of this conventional, familiar idea that I identify with so strongly. And our practice helps us see the way we suffer, right? It's all about me, right? Is Zazen ever pleasant when you're trying to problem solve? I don't think so. I've tried. Maybe you've had nice Zazen where you figured out some great solutions. Maybe those you probably forget by the end anyway. But Dogen offers us some great encouragement, though. He says why this actually is really going to be a good thing. The rest of this little famous teaching, which is on the very last line of 24, and then back over to 25 again. Now, what happens when we forget the self is not that we're forgetful. It's a different kind of thing. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. So here we have some kind of unusual use of language, and Dogen's hard to translate into English. He's hard to translate into modern Japanese too, so it's like everybody has trouble, because he uses language in kind of tricky, mental yoga ways. But actualized means maybe like being brought alive by, or awakened by, or living through, or channeling maybe, allowing maybe is easiest, allowing ourselves to be one with everything, right? We're one and we're not one with everything. And myriad things is like reality, right? The whole universe. So in this frame, no longer is it like I feel good when the things I like show up, and I feel bad when the things I don't like show up, which is blossoms and weeds again, right? It's I feel neither good nor bad. I feel just this, right? Buddha. No matter what comes up, it's actualizing me as Buddha, actualizing us as Buddha. So it's not limited to the domain of the personal either, because he says in the very next line that this is a subjective experience in this body and mind, because we're still in bodies and minds as we're doing our practice, right? It's this sense of dropping away, of freedom. And it's not just me. I practice this way, we all benefit. We all benefit. Just such a beautiful thought in Buddhism, I think, like one of the most beautiful thoughts in the whole tradition. To really recognize, and we can feel it, you can feel it, that this isn't just to make me feel a little better, right? I know I was, you're probably motivated to start practice because of that idea, because, it's where we are, right? We're self-centered in that one world. But as you do it and you connect with Sangha, maybe first you notice it with a circle of 10, 20, 30 people, like, oh, it really helps me when, they show up, it helps me. And then eventually it occurs to you, oh my gosh, maybe it helps them when I show up? Me? Right? Could that be? And there's a lot of evidence for that, right? If you pay attention, And then gradually you realize, oh, well, it's not just us 30 people who call ourselves part of the Bozeman Zen group. It's it's everybody, It helps everybody, all my relations, as the indigenous communities say, right? All my relations are benefited by our practice. And he says, the other thing that's great about that is there's nothing to hold on to. This last part is really beautiful too, this last line. And near the top of 25, no trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. Another place he wrote a poem about watching ducks fly away. And he said that there's no trace, and that no trace continues endlessly. So the duck knows where it's flying, but there's no, like, what's that little cloud behind a big jet? Yeah, there's none of that, whatever that thing's called. Right? They don't disturb the air, they just pass through, right? So our awakening is not a big deal. We're not going to be on the news because we had a beautiful sesshin and there was benefit flowing into the universe. But we know, right? This is a kind of a trust piece, or maybe a faith piece, but you feel it, right? Wow. And even after like half the time, you may have been judging yourself during the practice, moment to moment, because you don't want to forget yourself. Isn't it weird the way at the end, I don't want to make a prediction, but I'm going to risk it, that I bet you at Sunday at noon, we're going to all feel really good about this. Like, wow, we did something important together. And sometimes during the middle of it, it seems like this is like, why am I even here, right? Because that's the self, right? That's the nature of self. So these teachings are encouraging us, right, forget, open up, right. No, I don't want to, right. So, isn't that a nice teaching? Have you heard this one about the forget the self thing? It's really great, good thing this is good refrigerator teaching. Put it on your fridge. Next time you're annoyed at your kids or something, say, all right, forget yourself. Okay, kids, take as long as you want putting the shoes on. It's all good. I remember, do you have little kids? That's for you. Guess they're a little bigger now, though. Yeah. Okay, anyway, Genjo Koan just goes on and on. Everyone's such a gem. But the very next one is really great too. So let's do the next paragraph on page 25. Because it's also good practice advice for us, It says, when you first seek Dharma, you imagine you're far away from its environs. At the moment when Dharma is authentically transmitted, you are immediately your original self. So I was actually kind of just saying this. I stole my own thunder. That when we first start out, we feel like really in the first camp, right? And it's also a little weird, they've got these funny customs. The teachers are like into religious cosplay or something, and you don't feel that comfortable, and you think, what? But you're drawn to it, like you must have been drawn to it, right? Otherwise, why would you have come? But you feel far away, right? It's like, oh, gosh, I'll try going back next week, I guess, but it was kind of cool. I don't know, right? So you feel far away from it, And maybe you compare yourself to everyone else in the meditation. That's pretty common. I wonder if there's anybody who ever didn't compare themselves to everybody else in their first group meditation. And I wonder if anybody, when they were comparing themselves to others in their first group meditation, didn't think everyone else was calm, except them, right? So you feel far away. But then, at the moment when Dharma is authentically transmitted, you are immediately your original self. So this is kind of like remembering who you are, right? Remembering who you are in a deep way. And people tell me that sometimes, from practice or when I teach the mindfulness classes. They tell me something like, I feel like I remember who I am again. Which is such a weird thing to say, but it makes sense to us, doesn't it, We kind of forget who we are. And we're thinking about this bigger self, I think, without being quite verbalizing it that way. This connection to some bigger sense of who I am. And psychology is into this too, especially positive psychology, right? This greater than self sense, So psychology is a little bit everywhere. Actually, I shouldn't just narrow it down like I did. Sorry, psychology. But he does use the language of immediacy, which is famous in Zen and terribly confusing to us. He says, at the moment when Dharma is authentically transmitted, you are immediately your original self. And so that could give us all kinds of problems, right? Could practice for 30, 40 years saying, when's my moment going to come? I tried really hard. I was a very good student. I tried being a bad student. That didn't help either, So, I think part of the answer to that is you don't always recognize it subjectively in that kind of way, which Dogen also says other places. Actually, in Genjo Koan itself, he also says that. That sometimes, for some of us, due to just like karmic reasons, our conditioning and the situation of practice and, who we are, our attachment style or whatever, we do sometimes feel sudden shifts and that feel connected to all this. Like, oh, yeah, I get it. And then pretty much soon you're trying to attach onto that and the blossoms are falling, right? But for many of us, that we don't experience it that way subjectively. We seem always like the same old me. And maybe we take a look and we say, well, I am sleeping a little better, or maybe someone in our life whom we more or less trust tells us, I've heard this many times too, you seem a little calmer. My spouse said I seem calmer. Could that be true? I don't think so. So, there's this ancient debate in Buddhism of sudden and gradual, but actually I think they're very interpenetrated and can't be peeled apart. So Dogen just chose the language of immediacy here, but we also could have written this, as the gradual process of Dharma unfolds, you settle gracefully and peacefully into your original self. That's also true, right? That's also true. And the Soto Zen school kind of emphasizes that side of it a little more, but it's not so black and white as sometimes it sounds. I know some very nice Rinzai people, and so does Josh. They're not all popping off into awakening, screaming, and shouting. They do sometimes, though. It's their style. But this idea of being yourself is really interesting and counterintuitive, because what do we mean by self? What do we mean by self? The studying the self and forgetting the self and becoming your original self. So they used a modifier word there, Dogen did, original self. Another way this was sort of ported into modern language was by Suzuki Roshi, that figure, author of the famous book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. There's a copy in the office here right now. Japanese founder of San Francisco Zen Center. Came here in the 50s, died in the early 70s. One of his many sayings was, when you are you, Zen is Zen. He was good at distilling down Dogen. He wouldn't always acknowledge that he was talking about Dogen, but he'd distill it down. When you are you, Zen is Zen. So just be yourself, right? That's the whole mission here. Follow the form and follow the instructions and breathe and all this, but it's not about being somebody else, right? That's the problem with the immediate popping into enlightenment stories. They make it sound like if I just try hard enough, a new me is going to burst out of this shell, and this eggshell is just garbage and let's throw it away, No, it's always going to be you. You will always be you. Who else are you going to be? But of course that you is always changing. We just don't notice. So he goes on a bunch of different teachings, each one with different imagery and metaphor. It's just such a beautiful essay. And there's a zillion commentaries on it you can get, and it'd be a great Sangha study group once you're finished with Yogacara. Maybe you can ask Karen to take it up. And Yogacara fits with this really well, I think, too, actually. But for time, I won't unpack too many more. But there's teachings on perspective, on time itself. There's a great little thing about time itself. We think time is this linear thing from here to there, and it's always going at the same speed. And yeah, Dogen didn't think so. You might not be surprised. In Nature of Awakening, all kinds of stuff in there. And it's all helpful stuff. But it's also all a bunch of words, right? Which we can easily interpret and misinterpret and worry about or not worry about. But it does end with a beautiful story. We like stories. So let's jump to page 28. It's a story about a Zen master named Bao Shi. So, and these guys had multiple names in life and in death. They were given other names, and the Chinese had different ways of pronouncing their names than the Japanese, so it's very hard to keep track of the characters in these stories, but this is a minor character in Chinese Chan from the 10th century. Mayu Zen master Bao Shi was fanning himself. So imagine a little hand fan, right? A monk approached and said, "Master, the nature of wind is permanent, and there's no place it does not reach. Why then do you fan yourself?" "Ah," says the master, Although you understand that the nature of wind is permanent, Maya replied, you do not understand the meaning of its reaching everywhere. What is the meaning of its reaching everywhere? Asked the monk. Mayu just kept fanning himself. That was his answer. Just kept fanning himself. The monk bowed deeply. So the monk understood something, or was just trying to get out of there because he didn't, In these stories, the masters always have X-ray vision, though I can see what you're feeling, yeah. So this is a beautiful story, and I think fairly obvious, right? It's about practice, and it's about our Buddha nature. It's about this whole thing of these two worlds. If the nature of our world is that we're all Buddhas, why do we need to practice? So wind here stands for Buddha, fanning stands for practicing. And this was said to be one of Dogen's really central questions, and he even made up new words to kind of talk about practice and realization and practice, all the same thing, So this is a story he loved, I think, because of his own quest. Because he had a glimmer somehow at a young age, of this sort of awakened nature of all being. Somehow he intuited that or felt that. And yet all these teachings, and he was really smart, and he studied all the teachings, and said to have memorized thousands of pages of traditional texts somehow. And his teacher is also telling him in those teachings, and with those teachings, your nature is Buddha, and here's all the stuff you got to do. And the Tendai Buddhism he started out in is very elaborate with many, many practices. If you ever get to go to Japan, they're still doing them. You can go to their sacred mountain and check it out. And yet, what we need, so it's an and yet in both directions. We're Buddha, and yet we have to practice, and yet we're Buddha, I don't get it. So this is just another expression of that. And it's kind of fun just to swap the words around. So I recommend with these traditional texts, sometimes just write your own version, be kind of gutsy that way. So we could rearrange the words here a little bit and end up with, where did I write this out? So it could sound like this, maybe. Oh. You ever write your notes and sometimes they don't make sense to you anymore? Let me see here. I know I wrote this out. Well, I'll just try to do it on the fly. Then your judgy mind gets going, yeah. So, we'll start with although you understand. Although you understand the nature of Buddha is everywhere, you do not understand the meaning of this. What is the meaning of Buddha reaching everywhere? Mayu just kept practicing. That's what he's doing, he just kept practicing. The nature of Buddha is permanent and there's no place of reach. Why do you need to practice? Although you understand that, you said that, that's good, but you don't yet understand the meaning of practicing it and its true nature. So you have to practice even though you're Buddha. It felt tidier when I was preparing. That's also the nature of this stuff too. To me, that's a good modeling. For a second, Dogen seems really clear, and then next second you're like, I lost it. So what do? Forget about it. Forget about yourself. So before we go and carry on, just a little more specifics of meditation, because that's one thing Dogen doesn't give us a lot of. Right? He gives us a lot of interesting teachings and thoughts and imagery, and hopefully we're planting seeds that maybe will germinate when we need them, when we're having a little trouble. Or maybe in a calm moment watching a sunset, such teachings also will germinate. The sunset is reaching everywhere. Everything's like this. Wow. And so as I mentioned yesterday, there are other sources, not a lot of them actually. Our whole tradition is fairly low on practical advice. It's kind of part of the Zen shtick. And probably a lot of the practical advice happened privately, in the interview room, and wasn't written down. And a lot of this was given to monastics who were kind of inculcated in the middle of all this. So not much was written down practically about how to practice. But I mentioned the great master from 6th century China, Master Zhi Yi, whom Dogen definitely appreciated. Jurli left great, brilliant commentaries on the Lotus Sutra, which Dogen also loved. It's a big part of the Tendai school he started in. And if you've never studied the Lotus Sutra, you have a bizarre treat waiting for you. And this particular 6th century Chinese master wrote 2 whole books on the specifics of meditation. So I want to pull a little more from the 2 of them together here just for a minute, and then we'll go back to doing it. So remember, he was one that actually recommended breath counting way back then. So the practice of breath counting is at least 2,000 years old, right? It's not just some modern idea because we have terrible concentration because of the internet, you know. Back then, they needed it too. So if you haven't taken this up again or you're new to it, let's keep experimenting with breath counting. You know, the way you soften your hold on the breath, just let it flow. Feel the exhale, inhale, and just start quietly tagging the exhales as 1, 2, 3. Often you have to go back to 1. That's probably a better name for it than counting to 10, right? Going back to 1. It's just how we are. So he recommended that, and he recommended really paying attention to the quality of your breathing, letting your breath be soft and natural. Sometimes you might want to take a deep breath and a sigh to just kind of release your breath. He recommended doing something like that at the beginning of every period, actually. And breathe in through the nose and out from the mouth. It's a nice practice. Just release and then let it flow naturally. So that's the practice I first learned, and I didn't know there were any other options, so that's all I did for quite a while, 9, 10 years maybe. But then Master Zhuryu says, eventually this might get a little tiresome. Sometimes it's tiresome means you should stick with it because you're just not, engaging fully because all the reasons. But other times it's like, yeah, I'm comfortable in this. I can count my breath more or less. But it just feels, he called it coarse. It just feels coarse, like extra. I don't need that extra thing of the number anymore, at least for now. And this is not like a progression. Now I've graduated to level 2, I should definitely go to Dokusan and tell the teacher I'm at level 2. Suzuki Roshi used to chew people out when they did that. But it's more just like a moment-to-moment thing. Like at the moment, I'm settled today. Things were peaceful at home. I slept okay, right? I mean, it's all relative and absolute, always. So then you might want to just release the counting. And the next practice he calls following, which is exactly what it sounds like. Just following the breath with nothing extra at all. You don't even have to try to figure out where it is in the body, or you don't have to visualize your respiratory system or anything like that. Just a sense of the breath is me, I, and the breath. I don't even need that I and me in there. Just breath. Just following breath. There's nothing else but breath. And with both of these, you just follow the usual instructions when you're not there anymore, and you gently come back. So that's his second Dharma gate, following. So he encourages us to start out with a strong breath focus, because it's a doorway, It's a bridge into openness, where breath's just one phenomena of zillions, right? Nothing exactly special about it, or it's equally special as everything in the universe, right? But it's a helpful practice. And I thought you'd like to know that it's an ancient practice too, lest you're like turning your nose up and thinking you're supposed to be beyond such things, I think the other essential ingredient here, for sure, humility, right? Lots of it, buckets of humility. Okay, so that's probably more than enough for today. Thank you as always for being here and listening, and welcome to folks I'm just getting to see today. So nice to see you when I remember to look. And whether you're staying at Sesshin or going on about your practice in some other realm, let's continue. Let's continue. Beings are numberless.